delegate authority to deploy nuclear platforms and nuclear weapons to military commanders. Obviously, India's strategic thinking, cultivated and learned over years, stood considerably confused in a moment of crisis at the altar and primacy of a political party's electoral strategy. It conceded professional space to the whims of a heavyweight prime minister, and that ought to be a cause of concern for Pakistan when it is faced with a nuclear adversary whose strategic thinking and actions get muddled up even before the first shot has been fired. This was not only irresponsible conduct, but also institutional failure in India, resulting in the unlearning of whatever India had apparently learned in the first few decades. It is not difficult to conclude from the foregoing Indian strategic and operational conduct that the Indian political leadership, under the extremists of the BJP and RSS, led in a gung-ho style by the Prime Minister himself, falls in the category of a very irresponsible and reckless nuclear custodians. And that the Indian military is either too meek, or equally reckless, or equally incompetent, or perhaps a bit of all three, to offer sane professional advice. The other day, even General Bipin Rawat, the Indian Army Chief, has compromised himself when he decided to turn hermit and join the priests of some parivar of the RSS in order to be politically on the right side of the prevailing fanatic winds. Mr. Modi's infamous claim to order the IEF to take advantage of the clouds to beat Pakistani radars showed the IEF as a professional force in poor light. The scenario is a chilling reflection on the functionality, or more appropriately, dysfunctionality of the Indian command control system and the efficacy of its national command authority. It is critically important now, more than ever, for Pakistan to take note of the completely transformed state of strategic thought and behavior in India in its future politico-military assessments. I would also like to touch upon the chatter among India's military and strategic community that needs to be addressed. This is regarding their gravely mistaken conclusion of having called Pakistan a nuclear bluff by undertaking a single airstrike on Balakot, and that too embarrassingly unsuccessful. The reality is far from this. Like one swallow does not make a summer, one airstrike conducted most unprofessionally does not render a robust nuclear deterrence a bluff. Pakistan's nuclear capability, operationalized under the well-articulated policy of full-spectrum deterrence, comprises of a very large variety of numbers of strategic, operational, and tactical nuclear weapons on land, air, and sea, and is stitched together under a robust command and control system designed to comprehensively deter large-scale aggression against mainland Pakistan. As things stand, and as amply demonstrated during the February standoff, Pakistan's nuclear weapons continue to serve the purpose for which they have been developed on a daily and hourly basis by putting the fear of God in India's political and military leaders. India's foreign policy and politico-military strategy take into consideration Pakistan's real-time nuclear capability when developing contingency plans by making deliberate effort to skirt around the Pakistani nuclear capability and nuclear thresholds. Official India obviously does not take Pakistan's nuclear capability as a bluff. It is precisely the presence of these nuclear weapons that deters, and in the specific case of the Pulwama crisis, deterred India from expanding operations beyond a single unsuccessful airstrike. It is the full spectrum deterrence capability of Pakistan that brings the international community rushing into South Asia to prevent a wider Holocaust. That India chose not to proceed further to the third rung is a testimony to not only the bloody nose it got at the hands of the PF, but also the cold calculation that nuclear weapons could come into play sooner rather than later. That, ladies and gentlemen, is nuclear deterrence at work and not nuclear bluff. Yet another step of late that one can discern in India's unlearning process under the BJP government is regarding its no first use policy. The Defence Minister, Mr. Rajnath Singh's statement at the Pokhran test site that India's NFU policy may change under certain circumstances has effectively nullified the no first use policy that had already been eroded over time. In this context, I would like to say that India's so-called NFU policy was not ever meant to be taken seriously, not certainly by Pakistan, the country most affected by it. To me, it was always an academic formulation aimed at point scoring and earning brownie points with the international community. I am reasonably sure that operationally speaking, it wasn't even thought through in depth when it was first propounded some decades ago, because India, like Pakistan, was on a strategic learning curve. Full implications of the NFU policy were not quite assessed or understood by India. In real life, in a major conflict, and faced with a seriously adverse operational situation, if India so decided, the NFU policy would not have prevented India from first use of nuclear weapons to reverse or limit an adverse situation. We must note that the so-called policy of no first use is a political statement by a government, an expression of intent, a pious one at that. It is not repeated, not meant to be a credible operational contingency plan, irrespective of the ground situation. The NFU policy can easily be thrown out of the window if a situation warrants. If an unprincipled and cavalier BJP-led Indian government can consider violating a legally binding Indus Water Treaty or UN resolution in Kashmir, what is the value of a unilaterally adopted non-legal NFU policy? In any case, in India's officially declared nuclear doctrine, there are a number of caveats and operational situations visualized wherein India has actually reserved its right to use nuclear weapons first, notwithstanding the so-called NFU policy. This in itself is contradictory and reflective of confusion in the Indian strategic thinking. Over the last few years, a possible change in India's so-called NFU policy has been in the works in the form of an academic debate within the Indian strategic and political community, because many people realized that the policy was clearly hypocritical. Therefore, let me say that if India formally does jettison the NFU policy, which Rajnath Singh has hinted at, in real life, for Pakistan, the development would be meaningless and make no practical difference, because we have never believed in India's NFU policy in the first place. We have always proceeded from the assumption that India can and would use nuclear weapons first in certain situations. As such, hinting today coyly and announcing tomorrow formally that India has moved away from no first use to first use has no practical or operational connotations for Pakistan whatsoever. It's a political statement directed at the domestic nationalist gallery of Hindutva in a display of yet another macho conduct against Pakistan. If Rajnath Singh meant it as an oblique threat to Pakistan, he might like to think again. In the context of Dr. Naeem Salik's book on nuclear learning, frankly, I'm not quite sure whether to place this development in the category of learning or unlearning by the Indian strategists. On another note, I would like to mention that Pakistan's nuclear program has from the outset been viewed with concern by the outside world and has been subjected to one controversy or the other. One of the reasons probably is the fact that authentic writing on nuclear issues was generally considered a taboo in Pakistan, especially in the early stages of the development of the program due to the covert nature of the program. Whatever published literature was available was authored by the hostile Western and Indian writers, mostly in an effort to discredit the nuclear program. Even after the overt nuclearization in 1998, except for a solitary book by General Kamal Matinuddin and a few research articles, nothing of substance came out of Pakistan in the first decade post-nuclearization. However, beginning in 2009, when Dr. Naeem Salik's first book, Genesis of South Asian Nuclear Deterrence, came out, around a dozen books, including this latest book, have been published, which is encouraging, but is still no match to the hostile narrative that keep coming at a much faster pace. Now that we have taken a start, we need to gradually increase the tempo without compromising on the quality. While presenting our perspective duly supported by sound logic and reasoning, we must resist the temptation to regress into propagandist rhetoric, which carries no value with discerning readers. Though the information revolution has made access to information very easy and instant, but most of it is transient in nature. It is the book that retains its value as a source of knowledge and a steady companion. We must also encourage debate on nuclear issues, and our future publications should graduate further into more intricate issues related to nuclear signaling, escalation, de-escalation, and management of nuclear operations. For his excellent pioneering efforts and for leading the pack, I would once again like to extend my deepest congratulations, compliments, and appreciation to Dr. Naeem Salik for publishing this excellent intellectual work on a complex subject. As I end, I would like to leave a message of confidence and comfort with this audience with reference to the pathetic threats to Pakistan emanating from India, almost every other day, indicating a state of panic and frustration. From my vantage point of 2 decades of association with Pakistan's nuclear program, I would like to state that as far as Pakistan is concerned, We ought to remain cool and restrained in the face of these rhetorical and desperate threats, confident in the fact that Pakistan's nuclear deterrence capability, by the grace of Allah, is for real, it is robust and secure, and operationally delivers comprehensively every hour of the day and every day of the year on the purpose for which it was developed, that is deterrence of aggression. On that there must be no ambiguity whatsoever, neither in the minds of the adversary nor in our own minds. That is perhaps the reason why the hollow threats emanate in the first place, because of the limits that Pakistan's nuclear capability imposes on India's political and operational options. Pakistan's restrained, matured, and responsible conduct should clearly stand out in sharp contrast to India's irresponsible and reckless conduct, perhaps as an iron fist in a velvet glove. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.